The security camera footage from that night still exists somewhere in the county records office. I know because I filed the report myself, 3 weeks before I quit Riverside Memorial Gardens. What I can't understand is why nobody else seems to remember what happened, or why the timestamp on that footage shows something impossible. I'd been working cemetery security for 8 months when it started. Night shifts, mostly, walking the grounds from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., checking for vandalism, keeping kids from drinking among the headstones. Easy money for a retired cop with insomnia. The isolation never bothered me. After 30 years dealing with the living, the dead felt like better company. Riverside spans 47 acres of rolling hills 20 minutes outside the city. Established in 1987, modern layout, well-maintained. Nothing gothic or atmospheric about it, just neat rows of granite markers and the occasional mausoleum for families with money. The kind of place where people visit on Sundays with fresh flowers and leave feeling peaceful. During the day, the office sits near the main entrance, a small building with security monitors, a coffee machine, and a desk where I do paperwork between rounds. 4 cameras covered the main paths and entrance. The rest I handled on foot with a flashlight and radio that connected to the county dispatch. Everything changed the night I found the fresh grave. I was doing my 2 a.m. round when I noticed disturbed earth in Section C, near the newer plots. A rectangular patch of soil, maybe 6 feet by 3 feet, that looked recently dug and filled. No headstone. No flowers. No record of any burial scheduled for that week. I radioed dispatch. "This is security at Riverside Memorial. I've got what looks like an unauthorized burial in Section C." "Static then. Copy that. Are you certain it's a burial site?" I knelt down, shining my light across the dirt. It was definitely fresh, still soft, with clods of earth scattered around the edges. "Affirmative. Someone's been digging here within the last day or 2. We'll send a unit out in the morning. Document the location and continue your rounds." I took photos with my phone, marked the GPS coordinates, and headed back to the office to write it up. That's when I checked the security footage from earlier that evening. The cameras showed nothing unusual. I fast-forwarded through 8 hours of empty pathways and swaying trees. No vehicles. No people. No digging. According to the timestamp, I was looking at real-time footage from that exact area of Section C, and it showed undisturbed grass. I walked back outside with a growing knot in my stomach. The fresh grave was still there, exactly as I'd found it. I stood in front of camera 3, waving my flashlight. Back in the office, the monitors showed me clear as day. But when I rewound to check earlier footage of that same spot, it showed nothing but pristine ground. The next morning, I met Detective Sarachin from the county sheriff's office. We'd worked together years ago when I was still on the force. She trusted my judgment, which made what happened next even worse. "Show me," she said. We walked to Section C. The grass was undisturbed. No sign of digging. No fresh earth. Nothing. "Jim, are you feeling all right? Getting enough sleep?" I stared at the ground where I'd seen the grave. It was right here. 6 feet by 3 feet. Fresh dirt everywhere. She checked my incident report, compared it to the photos on my phone. The pictures showed normal grass. The GPS coordinates led to a spot that had clearly been undisturbed for months. Maybe it was shadows. Night shift can play tricks on your eyes. After she left, I spent my lunch break researching the cemetery records. Every burial was logged, mapped, and cross-referenced with the county. No gaps. No unexplained plots. No recent activity in Section C. But I knew what I'd seen. The second incident happened a week later. This time it was voices. I was checking the mausoleums around midnight when I heard conversation coming from behind the Morrison family crypt. 2 people, speaking quietly. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was urgent, secretive. I called out, "Security! This is private property." Silence. I rounded the corner with my flashlight raised. Empty space. Just the back wall of the mausoleum and a narrow gap leading to the next row of graves. I know you're here. Come out now and we can discuss this without involving the police. Nothing. But as I turned to leave, I heard it again, the soft murmur of voices, definitely coming from that same area. I spun around, illuminating every shadow. Nobody there. I radioed dispatch and requested backup. 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later and helped me search the entire cemetery. We found no evidence of trespassers, no signs of disturbance, no explanation for what I'd heard. Officer Martinez was diplomatic about it. Sound carries funny at night, especially in open spaces like this. Could have been traffic from the highway, radio chatter from a distance. But I'd been a cop for 3 decades. I knew the difference between distant noise and human conversation happening 10 feet away. The third incident broke something in me. I was reviewing security footage the next Tuesday when I noticed something wrong with the timestamp. The cameras showed me conducting my rounds, but according to the digital clock, I was doing them 3 hours before my shift started. I checked the system settings. Correct date, correct time zone, automatically synchronized with the National Atomic Clock. But the footage of me walking through Section C was stamped at 7:47 p.m., and I didn't start work until 10 p.m. I called the security company that installed the system. The technician walked me through every possible explanation: system glitches, power fluctuations, user error. We ran diagnostics remotely. Everything checked out perfectly. The equipment is functioning normally, Mr. Peterson. Timestamp is accurate to the second. I hung up and stared at the monitor. There I was, clear as day, making my rounds in broad daylight that looked exactly like the nighttime footage from my actual shift. Same route, same timing, same flashlight beam cutting through what should have been darkness but appeared as normal evening light. That's when I started calling in sick. I spent the next 3 days at home, researching everything I could find about Riverside Memorial Gardens. Construction records, zoning permits, geological surveys from before the cemetery opened. Most of it was routine paperwork, but buried in the county archives I found something that made my blood go cold. Before Riverside was built, the land had been a private cemetery. Small family plots dating back to the 1800s, abandoned when the owners moved west. The construction company hired to build the modern cemetery was supposed to relocate any remaining graves to the county burial ground. The relocation records showed 37 graves moved. But the original survey documented 41 burials. 4 graves unaccounted for. I tried calling the construction company. Out of business since 1991. I tracked down the project manager through social media. He died in 2018. The county supervisor who approved the project had no memory of any irregularities. Look, Mr. Peterson, that was almost 40 years ago. If there had been any issues with the cemetery construction, they would have been documented. Everything was done according to regulations. But I had copies of both surveys. 4 graves missing. 4 bodies never relocated. And Section C sat directly over what used to be the old family cemetery. I went back to work Thursday night because I needed this job, and because part of me had to know what was really happening. The cemetery felt different now, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. Every shadow seemed to move independently. Every sound echoed longer than it should. At 2:17 a.m., I found myself standing in Section C without remembering how I got there. My flashlight was off. My radio was silent. According to my watch, I'd lost 23 minutes somewhere between the office and this spot. The fresh grave was back. This time I didn't radio dispatch. I didn't take pictures. I just stood there, looking down at the disturbed earth, and finally understood what was happening. I wasn't seeing graves that shouldn't exist. I was seeing graves that should have been moved decades ago, but never were. The security cameras weren't malfunctioning, they were recording what was actually there, underneath the carefully maintained grass and modern landscaping. And the voices I'd heard weren't trespassers. They were the construction workers from 1987, having urgent, secretive conversations about what to do with the bodies they'd found but never reported. The timestamp wasn't wrong either. I was seeing the same events from multiple time periods, all happening simultaneously in a place where past and present refused to stay separate. I submitted my resignation the next morning. The cemetery hired a new security company within a week. I heard through contacts at the sheriff's office that the new guards reported similar incidents: unexplained graves, phantom voices, missing time. But management classified them as pranks or training issues. The official reports all say the same thing: no evidence of supernatural activity, no irregularities in cemetery operations, no reason for concern. But sometimes I still wake up at 2:17 a.m., and I can hear those voices discussing something they buried that should have stayed buried. And I know that somewhere in the county records office, there's security footage with impossible timestamps showing things that aren't supposed to exist. The worst part isn't what I saw at Riverside Memorial Gardens. The worst part is realizing how many other places might have the same problem, and how many other night shift workers are filing reports that nobody believes. Because if 4 bodies could be forgotten for almost 40 years in a place where everything is supposed to be documented and regulated, what else are we missing? I drive past Riverside sometimes on my way to my new job. The grounds look beautiful in daylight, peaceful, well-maintained, exactly the kind of place where families can visit their loved ones and feel comfort. But I never drive past at night anymore. The first time I noticed the van, I thought it was just another customer who changed their mind about stopping. White cargo van with tinted windows, circling the parking lot once before pulling back onto Highway 9. Nothing unusual about that. People do it all the time when they realize we're not the brand they wanted or they're looking for a restroom we don't have. But it came back the next night. Same time, around 1:30 a.m. Same slow circle around the lot. Headlights sweeping across the pumps and the front windows where I stood behind the register. Same departure without stopping. I've been working the overnight shift at Quick Mart for 7 months now. It's not a bad job for someone trying to finish their degree online, quiet enough to study between customers, decent pay for retail, and the isolation doesn't bother me. Highway 9 isn't exactly a major thoroughfare, so most of my business comes from locals grabbing beer or cigarettes, plus the occasional trucker needing coffee and directions. The store sits by itself about 3 miles outside Clearwater, surrounded by empty fields and a few scattered houses you can barely see from the road. Corporate installed a full security system last year after a robbery at their location in the next county. 8 cameras covering every angle of the interior and exterior, motion sensors, panic button under the register. Everything feeds to a monitoring station downtown and gets recorded on a local server in the back office. I felt safer knowing someone was watching, even remotely. At least I thought I did. The van started showing up every night. Always between 1:30 and 2 a.m., always the same route around the parking lot, always leaving without stopping. After a week, I called my manager. "Mike, there's this van that keeps circling the lot during my shift. White cargo van, no plates I can see. Just wanted you to know in case corporate asks about anything on the security footage. Probably just someone using the lot to turn around. Happens all the time on that stretch of highway. But keep an eye on it and call the cops if they actually stop or approach the building." I started paying closer attention. The van never just turned around, it made a complete circuit, slowly, like the driver was studying something. And it always approached from the south, circled clockwise, and headed north when it left. Same pattern every single night. I began checking the exterior cameras whenever I heard tires on gravel. The van's windows were too tinted to see inside, but I noticed other details. No front license plate. Small dent in the rear bumper. Magnetic sign on the driver's door that I couldn't quite read from the camera angle. 2 weeks into this routine, something changed. The van still came, still circled, but now it parked across the street for 10 or 15 minutes before leaving. Just sitting there in the darkness beyond the reach of our parking lot lights, facing the store. That's when I started feeling watched even when the van wasn't there. It began with small things. The sensation of eyes on me while I restocked shelves or cleaned the coffee station. The feeling that someone was standing just outside my peripheral vision. I'd turn to check the monitors and see nothing unusual, but the feeling persisted. During slower nights, I started studying the security footage from previous shifts. Corporate gave each store access to review their own recordings, officially for training purposes but mostly so managers could check up on employee behavior. I had the login credentials and started scrolling through hours of empty parking lot and fluorescent-lit interior shots. That's when I found the gaps. Small ones at first, 30 seconds missing here, a minute there. Always during the time frame when the van appeared. The footage would show the parking lot empty, then jump ahead with the van already gone, no record of it ever being there. I checked the system logs. No errors, no power interruptions, no maintenance records during those periods. The gaps were clean, professional, like someone had edited them out. I called the security company that installed our system. "This is Jake Morrison at Quickmart location 47 on Highway 9. I'm seeing some gaps in our recorded footage and wanted to report a possible equipment malfunction. Let me check your account. Okay, I'm showing normal operation for the past month. What specific gaps are you referring to?" I gave him the dates and times. He pulled up the footage remotely while I stayed on the line. "Mr. Morrison, I'm looking at the footage you mentioned, and I'm not seeing any gaps. The recording appears continuous throughout those periods." "That's impossible. I was just reviewing it an hour ago. Sometimes the local playback software can have buffering issues. Try refreshing your browser and checking again." I did. The gaps were gone. The footage now showed continuous recording, including several clear shots of the white van circling the lot. But I knew those clips hadn't been there an hour earlier. Someone was accessing our security system and editing the footage in real time. The next night, I decided to document everything myself. I set up my phone to record the monitors while I worked, creating my own backup of what was actually happening versus what the official system showed. At 1:43 a.m., the van appeared. I watched it through the window and on the exterior cameras simultaneously while my phone recorded everything. The van made its usual circuit, parked across the street for 12 minutes, then drove away. When I checked the official footage later, those 12 minutes showed an empty street. But my phone clearly captured the van sitting there, and more importantly, it captured something else. In the background of one exterior camera feed, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a second vehicle. A dark sedan parked behind the store, hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. Someone had been watching me while I watched the van. I started checking that camera angle obsessively. The sedan was there most nights, arriving before the van and leaving after it. Always in the same spot, always dark-colored, always parked where the store's lighting couldn't reach it. That's when I realized they weren't just watching the store. They were watching me specifically. I tested it by changing my routine. Instead of taking my break at 3 a.m., I took it at 2:30. The van showed up at 2:25. When I started doing inventory an hour early, the surveillance shifted to match my new schedule. They knew my patterns because they were tracking me in real time. I tried calling the police, but what could I report? That vehicles were legally parked on a public road. That I suspected someone was editing security footage, even though the official recordings showed nothing unusual. Officer Martinez was polite but skeptical. "Mr. Morrison, have these individuals threatened you or approached you directly?" "No, but..." "Have they damaged property or committed any crime you can document?" "Not exactly, but they're manipulating our security systems somehow. If you have evidence of cybercrime, you need to contact the FBI. But from what you're describing, it sounds like you might be dealing with stress or sleep deprivation. Night shift can be rough on people." I stopped trying to explain and focused on gathering proof. Real proof that couldn't be deleted or edited. I bought a small digital camera and hid it in the back office, positioned to record the security monitors. If someone was editing the official footage, this would capture the discrepancies. I also started noting every detail in a handwritten logbook: times, vehicle descriptions, license numbers when I could see them. 3 days later, I discovered they'd been inside the store. I was reviewing my hidden camera footage when I noticed something wrong with the timestamp. The recording showed me working alone as usual, but according to the timer, there was a 2-hour gap where I apparently didn't move at all. just stood in the same position behind the register like a statue. But I remembered those 2 hours clearly. I'd restocked the cooler, cleaned the restrooms, helped several customers. Normal activity that should have been captured. I checked the store's official security footage for that same period. It showed exactly what my hidden camera recorded, me standing motionless behind the register for 2 hours. That's when I understood what was happening. They weren't just editing the recordings. They were editing my memory. The next night, I set timers on my phone every 15 minutes and wrote down what I was doing when each alarm went off. By morning, I had 14 entries documenting normal work activities. But both camera systems showed me standing in place, unmoving for most of the shift. Either I was losing my mind, or someone had technology that could manipulate both digital recordings and human memory. I started researching online. Deep dives into government surveillance programs, corporate espionage, experimental psychology. Most of it was conspiracy theory nonsense, but buried in academic papers and leaked documents, I found references to something called behavioral modification through environmental control. The basic concept was terrifying, using a combination of electromagnetic frequencies, subliminal audio, and targeted surveillance to alter behavior and memory in test subjects. All conducted without the subject's knowledge or consent. QuickMart was owned by a subsidiary of Meridian Corporation, which had contracts with the Department of Defense. Our location was isolated, predictable, and equipped with sophisticated monitoring equipment. The perfect testing ground. I was a lab rat, and I didn't even know it. The van kept coming. The sedan kept watching. And every few nights, I'd lose hours that felt real but apparently never happened. I decided to run. Put in my notice, pack my things, get as far away from Highway 9 as possible. But when I tried to type my resignation email, my fingers wouldn't move properly. Like something was preventing me from forming the words. I could think about leaving, plan it in detail, even drive to the store manager's office. But every time I tried to actually quit, my body simply wouldn't cooperate. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were controlling me. Last week, I found a small scar behind my left ear that I'd never noticed before. Perfectly round, about the size of a pencil eraser, hidden by my hairline. It doesn't hurt, but sometimes I catch myself touching it unconsciously. The van still circles the lot every night. The sedan still parks behind the store. The security footage still shows gaps that I remember as normal activity. But now I understand why I can't leave, and why my memory doesn't match the recordings. I'm not just working the night shift at QuickMart. I'm part of an ongoing experiment in human behavioral control, and the only reason I know about it is because something went wrong with their memory modification process. The real question isn't how long this has been happening. The real question is how many other night shift workers in how many other isolated locations are living the same routine, completely unaware that their every action is being monitored, recorded, and controlled. Because if they can do this to me, they can do it to anyone. And most people would never even know it was happening. I keep working my shift because I have no choice. But every night I write down what I remember in a notebook I hide in different places around the store. Maybe someday someone will find these notes and understand what really happens during the overnight shift at QuickMart location 47. If you're reading this, check for the scar behind your ear. And pay attention to your security cameras. The gaps in the footage aren't technical malfunctions. The employee handbook specifically states that overnight data processing staff are not permitted to access floors other than the third level during their shift. I found this rule odd when I started working at Meridian Financial 3 months ago, but I assumed it was standard corporate security protocol. Large accounting firms handle sensitive client information, after all. What the handbook doesn't mention is that you can hear everything happening on the floors above and below through the building's ventilation system. I work the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, processing electronic transactions and reconciling accounts that come in after business hours. It's perfect for someone like me, a graduate student who needs flexible income and quiet time to study between system updates. The pay is decent, the work is mindless, and I have the entire third floor to myself. Or I thought I did. Meridian occupies a 12-story building in the financial district, built in the 1980s with that distinctive concrete and glass architecture that looks imposing during the day and unsettling at night. Floors 4 through 10 house the main offices, accounting departments, and conference rooms. The executive suites take up the 11th and 12th floors. Below me, the second floor contains the IT department and server rooms, while the first floor is just lobby and security. My workstation sits in the middle of an open floor plan filled with empty cubicles that stretch into shadows beyond the reach of the emergency lighting. During my shift, only every fourth overhead fixture stays on, creating pools of brightness separated by corridors of darkness. The silence is almost complete, just the hum of computers, the distant sound of traffic, and occasionally the building's heating system cycling on and off. At least, that's what I thought the sounds were. It started 3 weeks ago with footsteps on the floor above me. Slow, deliberate walking that would begin around 1 a.m. and continue intermittently throughout the night. At first, I assumed it was security making rounds, even though my employee orientation specifically stated that security only monitored the building through cameras and electronic systems during overnight hours. I called the security desk to check. "This is Alex from third floor data processing. I'm hearing footsteps upstairs. Is someone conducting a security sweep?" "Negative, Alex. No personnel authorized for fourth floor access during overnight hours." "Are you certain you're hearing footsteps?" I listened. The walking continued, steady, measured steps moving from one end of the building to the other. "Definitely footsteps. Should I be concerned?" "We'll make a note of it. Probably just the building settling or pipes expanding. These older buildings make all kinds of noises at night. But buildings don't settle in perfect walking rhythm for 30 minutes at a time." The next night, I paid closer attention. The footsteps weren't random. They followed a specific pattern. Starting near what would be the elevator bank, moving toward the west side of the building, pausing for several minutes, then returning along a slightly different path. The pause always lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I timed it. I pulled up the building directory on my computer. The fourth floor housed the corporate accounts division, specifically the team that handled Meridian's largest clients. During the day, it would be filled with senior accountants and financial analysts. At night, according to the security protocols, it should be empty. But someone was up there, following the same route every night, stopping at the same location for the same amount of time. I started documenting everything. Time the footsteps began, duration of each walking sequence, length of the pauses. Over 2 weeks, I identified a precise pattern that repeated with mechanical consistency. Whoever was on the fourth floor was conducting some kind of systematic activity that required exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds at each stop. That's when I discovered the sounds weren't just coming from above. During a particularly quiet moment around 2:30 a.m., I heard something that made my skin crawl, the faint sound of typing coming from the floor below me. Not the rapid, irregular pattern of someone working at a computer, but slow, methodical keystrokes with long pauses between them. Like someone was carefully entering information one character at a time. I called security again. "This is Alex on 3. I'm hearing typing sounds from the second floor. I thought the IT department was unmanned during overnight shifts." "Correct, no IT personnel on duty. Could be automated systems running updates or backup procedures. Automated systems don't use keyboards." Long pause. "We'll look into it. Continue with your regular duties." They never followed up. The next night, I tried a different approach. Instead of calling security, I decided to investigate personally. My keycard provides access to stairwells and emergency exits, even if I can't open doors to other floors. I could at least verify whether there were lights on in the second floor windows. I walked to the west stairwell and climbed to the landing between floors. Through the small window in the stairwell door, I could see into a section of the second floor IT department. Several computer workstations were active, monitors glowing with what looked like spreadsheet data. At one of them sat a figure hunched over a keyboard, typing with the same slow, methodical rhythm I'd been hearing. The figure wasn't wearing the standard IT uniform. Instead, they wore a dark suit identical to what Meridian's executives wear during board meetings. I tried to get a better look, but the angle was wrong and the lighting was too dim. What I could see clearly was that this person was entering data into what appeared to be the same financial processing system I used on the third floor. But their screen showed account numbers I didn't recognize, longer strings of digits that didn't match Meridian's standard client codes. They worked for exactly 47 minutes, then shut down the workstation and disappeared from view. The same thing happened every night for the next week. Someone in executive attire, accessing IT systems after hours, working with unfamiliar account numbers, following a precise schedule that never varied. I started researching Meridian's organizational structure, trying to understand who might have both executive-level access and the technical knowledge to operate financial processing systems. What I found in the employee directory was disturbing. Nobody currently employed at Meridian matched that description. The IT department was entirely separate from the financial divisions. Executives had their own systems and support staff. No one person would have legitimate access to both networks, especially not during overnight hours when all access was supposed to be logged and monitored. Someone was conducting unauthorized financial activities using Meridian's systems, and they were doing it during my shift because they knew I was the only witness. I decided to document everything with my phone. The next night, I positioned myself in the stairwell with the camera ready. At exactly 1:47 a.m., the mysterious figure appeared at their usual workstation. Through the phone's zoom function, I could see more details. Middle-aged person, definitely wearing a Meridian executive suit, working with intense concentration. But what shocked me was their familiarity with the systems. No hesitation, no consultation of reference materials, just fluid navigation through complex financial databases. This wasn't an outsider who had somehow gained access. This was someone who belonged here, someone with intimate knowledge of Meridian's operations. I managed to record nearly 10 minutes of footage before the figure finished their work and left. When I reviewed the video later, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection on one of the computer monitors, I could see additional figures working at other stations throughout the IT department. The entire second floor was occupied during overnight hours by people who weren't supposed to exist. The next day, I tried accessing the employee database to cross-reference the faces I'd recorded. My login credentials didn't provide access to personnel files, but I could search the building directory for current employees by department. Every search returned the same result: no matches found. I was witnessing systematic financial fraud being conducted by individuals who had no official connection to Meridian Financial, using our systems, during hours when they knew only one person would be present to potentially observe them. And I was that person. I realized they probably knew about me too. If they had access to employee schedules and security protocols, they would know exactly when the overnight data processor worked and which floors they could access. They were conducting their illegal activities right under my nose, confident that I couldn't interfere or gather evidence. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how much sound travels through the building's ventilation system. I spent the next week mapping their activities by audio alone. The footsteps on the fourth floor weren't random walking. They were someone moving between specific workstations, probably accessing terminals that required executive-level authorization codes. The timing of their work was coordinated with the activities on the second floor, suggesting a well-organized operation that required both financial access and technical expertise. What I discovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about my job. While reviewing my own work logs, I noticed discrepancies in the transaction data I'd been processing. Account numbers that matched the unfamiliar sequences I'd observed on the second floor screens. Transfer amounts that were slightly higher than what showed in my processing queue. Timestamps that didn't align with when I actually completed the work. Someone was modifying the financial data after I processed it, using my login credentials and workstation access to legitimize unauthorized transactions. I wasn't just a witness to corporate fraud. I was an unwitting accomplice. Every transaction I processed during my overnight shift was being altered to facilitate money movement that would appear legitimate in Meridian's official records. The people working on the other floors weren't stealing from the company. They were using the company's systems to launder money for external clients. And my job was to provide the digital fingerprint that made it all look authorized. I tried to log into the financial systems from home to gather evidence, but my access had been restricted to on-site terminals only. When I attempted to contact Meridian's compliance department, I was told that all fraud reports must be submitted through my immediate supervisor. My immediate supervisor, according to the organizational chart, was someone named David Chen who worked on the 4th floor. The same floor where I'd been hearing footsteps every night. I'd never met David Chen. I'd never received a single email from him, or attended any meetings with him. According to my employee records, he'd been my supervisor for 3 months, but I couldn't find any evidence that he actually existed. Which meant that whoever had hired me, whoever had given me access to Meridian's financial systems, whoever was ultimately responsible for my work, wasn't an official Meridian employee. The entire overnight data processing position was a fabrication designed to provide cover for systematic financial crimes. I decided to stop showing up for work, but when I tried to submit my resignation, the HR system wouldn't accept it. My employee status showed as critical overnight operations, with termination restricted pending supervisory approval. Approval from David Chen, who didn't exist. I tried calling in sick, but received a message stating that my attendance was mandatory and that failure to report for scheduled shifts would result in legal action for breach of contract and violation of confidentiality agreements. They weren't just using me to launder money. They had legally trapped me in the position. Last night, I went to work as usual because I didn't know what else to do. But instead of processing the transaction queue, I started investigating the building's security systems from my workstation. What I found was worse than anything I'd imagined. The overnight security monitoring wasn't conducted by an external company. The cameras, access logs, and alarm systems were all managed by the same people operating on the 2nd and 4th floors. They weren't avoiding detection, they were controlling it. Every night for 3 months, I'd been sitting alone in a building that was actually filled with criminal activity, under surveillance by the same people who were using my identity to commit federal crimes. And according to the digital trail they'd created, I was the ringleader. My login credentials showed authorization for transactions worth millions of dollars. My workstation had been used to access executive-level financial systems. My employee ID had been present during every illegal transfer. If law enforcement ever investigates, all evidence will point to me as the primary suspect in a sophisticated money laundering operation. I'm writing this from my apartment because I can't go back to Meridian, but I also can't prove my innocence. The people who orchestrated this fraud have covered their tracks perfectly, leaving me as the only visible participant in their scheme. The footsteps on the 4th floor weren't random. They were someone systematically destroying evidence while creating new documentation that incriminates me further. The typing on the 2nd floor wasn't data entry. It was the careful construction of a digital identity that makes me responsible for crimes I didn't even know were happening. I don't know who these people are or how they infiltrated Meridian's systems so completely. But I know they're still there, probably training my replacement right now. If you ever take a night shift job that seems too good to be true, especially one that requires you to work alone with access to sensitive systems, pay attention to the sounds around you. Because you might not be as alone as they want you to think. The radio call came in at 2:17 a.m. Unit 23, respond to 1247 Riverside Drive for a welfare check. Complainant reports no contact with elderly resident for several days. Standard call, the kind I'd handled dozens of times during my 8 months with the Millbrook Police Department. What wasn't standard was the way Sergeant Martinez's voice changed when he gave me the address. Copy that, Unit 23 responding to 1247 Riverside Drive. I replied, already turning my patrol car toward the east side of town. Actually, Officer Chen, disregard that call. We'll handle it during day's shift. I paused, finger hovering over the radio. In 8 months, I never heard dispatch cancel a welfare check. Those calls get priority because waiting could mean the difference between saving a life and finding a body. Sergeant, I'm already en route. ETA 3 minutes. Long silence then. Unit 23, return to patrol Sector 7. That's a direct order. I pulled over, trying to understand why my sergeant would prevent me from checking on someone who might need help. Martinez had been my training officer when I graduated from the academy, a 20-year veteran with a spotless record and a reputation for going above and beyond for the community. He'd never given me a reason to question his judgment. But something about his tone tonight felt wrong. I've been working the midnight shift in Millbrook for 8 months now, covering the quieter residential areas while more senior officers handle downtown and the commercial districts. It's a small department, only 18 officers total, and we all know each other's voices, habits, and patrol patterns. The overnight shift is usually just me, Officer Rodriguez in the business district, and Sergeant Martinez coordinating from dispatch. Millbrook is the kind of town where the most serious crime is usually vandalism or domestic disputes. Population 12,000, mostly families and retirees, surrounded by farmland and state forest. I grew up here, went to college downstate, and came back because I wanted to serve a community I actually cared about. Most nights, I spend more time helping people with flat tires than dealing with actual crime. Which is why what happened next was so unsettling. Instead of returning to Sector 7, I decided to drive past 1247 Riverside Drive. Not stopping, not getting out, just a routine patrol through the neighborhood. What I saw made me immediately understand why Martinez wanted me to stay away. There were already 3 police vehicles at the address. Martinez's sergeant unit, Rodriguez's patrol car, and a third vehicle I didn't recognize, a dark sedan with government plates. All parked with lights off, positioned to block the view of the house from the street. This wasn't a welfare check being handled by day's shift. This was an active scene being managed by my own colleagues, and they didn't want me to know about it. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back through the tree line behind the houses. From there, I could see into the backyard of 1247 Riverside Drive. Through the kitchen window, I watched Martinez, Rodriguez, and 2 people in suits systematically going through the house with flashlights, moving with the careful precision of a crime scene search. But there was no crime scene tape, no evidence technicians, no official documentation of whatever they were investigating. I took photos with my phone and retreated to my patrol car, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Why would my sergeant lie about a welfare check? Why were federal agents involved in what should be a routine police matter? And why was I being deliberately excluded from an investigation happening in my own patrol sector? I spent the rest of my shift pretending to conduct normal patrols while actually conducting surveillance on my own department. At 4:30 a.m., all 3 vehicles left 1247 Riverside Drive simultaneously, driving in different directions without using radios to coordinate. The next morning, I checked the official dispatch logs for my shift. No record of the welfare check call. No mention of any activity at 1247 Riverside Drive. According to the department's documentation, nothing unusual had happened during the overnight hours. But I had photos proving otherwise. I started researching 1247 Riverside Drive through public records. The house belonged to Eleanor Hutchins, an 78-year-old widow who had lived there for 30 years. No criminal history, no outstanding warrants, no obvious reason for federal law enforcement interest. Her property taxes were current, her house was well maintained, and according to her neighbors, she was a quiet person who kept to herself. The kind of person whose disappearance might not be noticed for days. Over the next week, I paid attention to patterns I'd never noticed before. Dispatch calls that got reassigned or canceled when I was the responding unit. Radio chatter that stopped abruptly when I joined the channel. Colleagues who avoided eye contact during shift briefings. I realized I was being systematically excluded from certain types of calls, and it wasn't random. I started documenting everything. Times, locations, radio traffic, personnel assignments. What emerged was a clear pattern. Whenever a call came in involving elderly residents, domestic disputes in specific neighborhoods, or anything related to the east side of town, I was either reassigned or told to stand down. Someone was curating my patrol activities to keep me away from particular incidents. I decided to test my theory. During my next shift, I positioned myself near the area where most of my excluded calls originated and waited to see what happened. At 1:45 a.m., I heard Rodriguez request backup for a domestic disturbance at an address I recognized, one of the houses I'd been redirected away from the previous week. I responded without waiting for assignment. Unit 23 en route to assist Unit 19. Negative, Unit 23. Unit 19 reports situation resolved, no backup needed. But I was already close enough to see Rodriguez's patrol car parked outside the house, along with Martinez's vehicle and the same dark sedan from the Riverside Drive incident. Through the windows, I could see figures moving around inside with flashlights. Another unofficial search, another operation that wouldn't appear in any official records. I took more photos and started developing a theory that made my stomach turn. What if these weren't investigations? What if my colleagues were systematically targeting vulnerable residents for reasons that had nothing to do with law enforcement? Eleanor Hutchins had disappeared after their visit to her house. The person at tonight's domestic disturbance was also an elderly resident living alone. Both incidents involved the same personnel conducting unofficial searches of private property. I needed to know what they were looking for. The next day, I visited Eleanor Hutchins' neighbors, claiming to follow up on the welfare check. What I learned confirmed my worst fears. "Oh, Eleanor moved out about a week ago," her next-door neighbor told me. "Sudden decision. Said her family was relocating her to a care facility downstate. Strange though, she never mentioned having family before, and she left a lot of her belongings behind. Did anyone help her move? Some official-looking men came by with a truck. Happened really fast, middle of the night. I thought it was odd, but Eleanor seemed to know them." I asked to see the inside of Eleanor's house, claiming the department needed to verify it was properly secured. The neighbor had a spare key and let me in. The house had been thoroughly cleaned, but not by Eleanor. Professional cleaning, the kind that removes all traces of DNA and fingerprints. Her furniture was gone, her personal belongings had vanished, and there were small holes in the walls where something had been removed. In the basement, I found what they'd been looking for, a hidden panel behind the water heater containing stacks of documents and old photographs. Financial records, property deeds, insurance policies, and something else that made my blood run cold. Photographs from the 1970s showing young police officers posing with drugs, cash, and evidence bags. Among them, I recognized a much younger version of Chief Morrison, Martinez, and several other department veterans. Eleanor Hutchins hadn't just been a random, elderly resident. She'd been a witness to police corruption going back decades, and she'd kept evidence of it hidden in her house. The unofficial searches weren't targeting random victims. They were eliminating people who had knowledge of historical crimes committed by current department leadership. I photographed everything and sealed the documents back in their hiding place. As I left Eleanor's house, I noticed a police cruiser parked across the street with someone watching through binoculars. They knew I'd found the evidence. My next shift started normally, but I could feel the tension in every radio communication. Martinez's voice was different, more careful. Rodriguez avoided the usual friendly chatter. And I received assignments that kept me far away from any location where I might discover additional evidence. At 3:20 a.m., I was ordered to respond to a possible break-in at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The address was in an industrial area with no residents and no witnesses, the perfect place for an ambush. I acknowledged the call but didn't respond immediately. Instead, I parked behind a closed gas station and called the State Police Internal Affairs Division from my personal phone. "This is Officer Jennifer Chen with Millbrook PD. I need to report systematic corruption within my department, including evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and possible harm to elderly residents. Officer Chen, these are serious allegations. Do you have documentation? Photos, witness statements, and physical evidence of a decades-old cover-up." I believe my safety is compromised and I need immediate assistance. We can have investigators meet you tomorrow morning at. No, you don't understand. They know I found the evidence. I think they're planning to eliminate me tonight. The dispatcher's tone became more urgent. Where are you now? I gave my location and requested immediate backup from state police. While I waited, I uploaded all my photos and documentation to a cloud storage account and sent the access information to 3 different email addresses: my sister, my college roommate, and a journalist I'd met during a community relations event. If something happened to me, the evidence would survive. State police arrived 20 minutes later and escorted me to their barracks for a full debriefing. By morning, federal investigators had sealed Eleanor Hutchins' house and issued arrest warrants for Martinez, Rodriguez, Chief Morrison, and 4 other officers. What they found during the investigation was worse than I'd imagined. For over 40 years, members of the Millbrook Police Department had been running protection schemes for drug dealers, stealing evidence from crime scenes, and intimidating witnesses who might expose their activities. When those witnesses got too old to be useful or became potential threats, they were relocated to ensure their silence. Eleanor Hutchins had been the record keeper, documenting everything in exchange for protection. But when new leadership threatened to clean house, she became a liability instead of an asset. I learned that my hiring wasn't random either. They'd specifically recruited someone young and inexperienced who could be controlled and manipulated. My patrol assignments were designed to keep me away from their ongoing criminal activities while maintaining the appearance of normal police operations. 7 officers were eventually convicted on federal racketeering charges. The Millbrook Police Department was dissolved and replaced with county sheriff coverage. I testified at trial and entered a witness protection program because several defendants had connections to organized crime figures who viewed my testimony as a betrayal worthy of retaliation. I work for a different police department now, in a different state, under a different name. But I still work night shifts because I've learned something important. The worst crimes often happen when honest people aren't watching. Every night, I think about Eleanor Hutchins and the other victims who trusted police officers to protect them, only to be betrayed by the very people sworn to serve and protect. The radio calls still come in at all hours, and I respond to every single one. Because I know that the moment you start making exceptions, the moment you trust that someone else will handle the difficult cases, you create space for corruption to flourish. Most people assume that police corruption is about money or power. But the most dangerous corruption is the kind that turns law enforcement into predators, systematically targeting the most vulnerable members of society, while hiding behind badges and authority. If you ever call the police for help and notice that the response seems wrong, that officers are asking unusual questions or behaving in ways that don't feel right, trust your instincts. Because sometimes the people you call for protection are the ones you most need protection from. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.